Welcome to the Ducks Unlimited podcast, the only podcast about all things waterfowl. From hunting insights to science-based discussions about ducks, geese, and issues affecting waterfowl and wetlands conservation in North America, we bring the resource to you. The DU Podcast with your hosts, Chris Jennings and Dr. Mike Brasher.
Tony Vandemore, owner, operator, guide at Habitat Flats. How's the teal season going for you?
Man, I'll tell you what, this teal season's been tough for us. We've been licking our chops because everything looks incredible.
Yeah.
And it couldn't look any better. But on the flip side, there's still tens, if not hundreds of thousands of acres of water in that Missouri River basin from us to South Dakota.
Yeah.
I mean, it's incredible. I mean, there's still highways that just got opened up here the last couple of weeks. So they're really scattered out, and there's good habitat everywhere. I mean, everything you drive past is just prime time teal habitat.
Yeah.
So they've been pretty scattered out. I mean, talking to some of our guys, like Ben Fillon, one of our guides from South Dakota, I mean, every pothole up there is still covered in blue wings, but it's 93 degrees down here, and it's 85 up there. I think they're really delayed.
Yeah. I've heard that kind of all the way up and down the flyway. So
it is interesting. You normally think of blue wings. You normally think they're gonna, and they do. They'll migrate. They'll start their migration regardless of the temperature. But this kind of year really does make you think about how that species as well can be influenced by temperature. And as you mentioned, Tony, also influenced by the amount of habitat on the landscape up there in those areas. All of it, those decisions a lot of times are reflect this balance between, what do I need and relative to the conditions that I'm experiencing right now. And so, they may be just hanging out a little bit longer than they normally do.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, we're still going to see blue-winged teal the first week of August here in Missouri. That's about when I see the first one come through. I mean, I'll see one or two here and there. And then, you're going to see some more, throughout August, you're going to be seeing teal. And those teal that we see then, I don't care what chance for a food source, you're not going to hold them. They're going to be in Mexico by the time we even open up.
Mm-hmm.
And it seemed like when I was younger, and it could just be time warping my memory or whatever, but, opening day, you can count on teal season was going to be incredible. And that first week, it was always good. But the last few years, honestly, our second week has been way better than our first week.
Yeah, that's interesting.
The ones that come a little bit later, the ducks you hold, the blue-wing, those are the teal that hold and they stayed, and they'll stick on food sources and whatnot. And the ones that come earlier, they're just burning for the coast.
Yep.
And it seems like they've come a little bit later each year.
You're opening that new lodge, the Grand. Tell us a little bit about it. Kind of tell some of our listeners about why you decided to open up this new awesome lodge. It looks like. Yeah,
it's going to be a pretty neat area for us. I mean, we've hunted down that way a long time. It's only 35 minutes south of our home lodge, but there were some farms that had come for sale and right next to the refuge, and we were able to purchase those, and the bluff right next to it where we could cut the lodge in. And it certainly has not been a very good year to do all that from a dirt work perspective with the floods and the rain and all that. It's been a humongous struggle, but overall it's going to be a very, very cool area right on the Missouri River, which, I mean, anymore there's just so many ducks that winter on the river that it's just it's pretty wild. We just don't get the winters we're used to, and the river never freezes solid. So there's a lot of ducks that winter there and never get any further south than that, just like there's, 300,000, 400,000, 500,000 ducks that stay in South Dakota regardless of the temperature.
Yeah.
Never make it to us.
Yep.
Yeah, I think sometimes we don't give those birds enough credit for being smart enough to figure out what allows them to survive through a winter. I think one of our flaws as people is to assume that these birds are supposed to do the same thing year after year after year, and they absolutely do not. Yeah. They respond to a very dynamic system.
Exactly right.
And that system changes from year to year, and it also changes over long time periods. And what you've just described there is a reflection of that, just another reflection of that. So it's a pretty neat deal.
Yep, I mean, there's farming practices and all that, but I mean, biggest change I've seen growing up, everybody had snowmobiles. I mean, we had lots and lots and lots of snow. You could count on our area a lot of years. First week of December was our freeze out, and then you were done. And I mean, heck, last year it was 75 degrees there when we ended up. I mean, we just don't get the winters. We might still get a snow, but we don't give those birds enough credit. I mean, if you actually sit there and watch them, we can get a 6 or 7, 8 inch snow like we had the 8th of November last year, and they'll sit there on the ice or they'll sit there in the refuge and huddle up together, but they know 2 days later it's going to be 60 degrees and no more snow. I mean, they know when they can sit through it.
Yeah, and you know, like I say, we don't give enough credit for just being smart enough and being tough enough.
You know, it's just like those plants that you were talking about earlier, the ones that have persisted and been able to survive through all that. You know, and now those are the ones that that we're left with on the landscape. And you know, in a lot of respects, that's the same thing that kind of happens with waterfowl.
There's a lot of debate with habitats and all that, but I mean, you could play devil's advocate and take it the opposite direction and probably even further left. But I mean, are they getting smart enough to know that the further north they stay, seasons are closing and they're not getting pressured? I mean, I don't know. I just know there's a lot more ducks that are wintering further north than they used to.
Be the first to know when ducks are on the move. Sign up for DU's waterfowl migration email alerts and receive ongoing in-depth updates on the latest habitat conditions, weather changes, and hunting reports for your flyway. Visit ducks.org/migration alerts.
I'll apologize up front, but I just want to ask you some questions and kind of get you to relive that nightmare that was the Light Goose Conservation Order 2019. I know I lived through it. I survived it. I survived my nightmare, but I know you guys started out in Arkansas, and where I hunt is not too far from where some of your guys were bumming around over there, and it was tough, and it didn't really matter what you threw at them. They were smarter. They were very good at being able to pick out hunters, and you know the reality was it was all adult birds. But you know what were you seeing all the way up the flyway from Arkansas all the way back up into your place?
Well, I mean, we knew with the production it was going to be a tough year, but bottom line is, I mean, they still have feed. So going into it, we figured that if we got the right conditions, you know, there were still going to be good hunts to be had.
Yep.
And we got down to Arkansas, and first 2 mornings, I think it was, the first 2 mornings, you know, no wind, cloudy, not great conditions. Had a couple of big spins that got in there, but they had specks in there with them. And if we hear or see a speck, there's no shot called. That's just our rule. We're not going to take a chance on it. So opening day, I don't think we pulled the trigger. We had like 3 bunches in there that were big bunches right in our face, but they had specks in them. So we were a little disappointed, but a little bit encouraged that, you know, we got them to work. They're adults, whatever. It's not going to be that bad. The third day, we caught sun and wind and cold and killed 150 of them in like the first hour. We're like, all right, this season's not going to be too bad as long as we get the right conditions. And then, if you remember, it started raining and it never quit.
Yeah.
I mean, that kind of sums up spring of 2019 snow goose season for me. Was rain, clouds, no wind, mud, just terrible, terrible conditions. I mean, half of Arkansas flooded.
Oh yeah.
Instead of getting geese coming a mile or two stringing out off the roost, they're roosting in the same field they're feeding in. They're hopping about 100 yards away to eat. I mean, a lot of birds you couldn't even get to because of the flood water. And I mean, we got back up here in Missouri. It was no different up here. I mean, we had a boatload of geese staged here last year, and just terrible conditions to try to kill them. I mean, not like sunshine and wind, and it seemed like every day last year was raining or cloudy or calm. It was just a rough spring.
Yeah. I think out of the 10 or 12 hunts that I did last year, we had maybe 2 decent days. And I say decent only because in comparison to 2018, it was unbelievable. Sure. And it was just conditions. It was literally a nightmare. I mean, we really struggled, and really when it rains, if it's raining or anything, we're not even hunting. I mean, it's not worth it to get out there for us. I mean,
I'd have to look at my journal, but I bet in for 45, 50 days or whatever, 100. I bet we didn't see the sunshine, 7 or 8 of them.
Wow.
Yeah, that makes it tough. I mean, those birds are smart enough as it is.
Especially when you have as many adults in that population as you did last year, right?
Yeah. We don't have all the information right now for the full goose numbers, but it looks like, you can go ahead and kind of explain what you've been hearing on as far as goose numbers. I'm sure Tony would be interested in hearing about that.
Yeah, well, we're going to try to have at least one, maybe a couple of people on a little bit later to talk about what we're seeing on let's say goose recruitment, light goose and white front goose recruitment here. I don't know, in the next 3-4 weeks or so, maybe even a little bit longer than that. But we'll see. We'll try to get them on. And what I've heard thus far is that production up in the Arctic in some locations was pretty poor. In some locations, that production they had a decent hatch, but then a lot of those goslings just didn't make it. And then in some of the colonies a little bit farther east, the hatch was about average, but it seemed to be a little bit late. If I remember this correctly, it seemed to be a little bit late. And the true test was going to be how the weather conditions materialized between that point and when those goslings took flight. So they still had to make it through that, because the time window within which they have to breed up there and get on the wing is so compressed anyway. Just a little fluctuation in the timing of bad weather can really, really hurt things. And so we want to get somebody on to talk a little bit more in depth about that, what they're seeing and what are the different explanations for the poor production in recent years. And some of it's just going to be driven. A lot of it will just be driven by the weather. I think some of that happened this year, but then there might also be some sort of habitat issues going on up there in some locations. So we want to explore that in a little bit more detail. But I think the bottom line from what we heard is that the general expectation should be for another year of sort of fairly high percentage of adult birds. Then a lot of that though is going to depend on what happens in some of those other colonies that might not be monitored as closely. So we'll have more information here, I think, in the next few weeks. But don't get too excited, I think, in terms of expecting a whole lot of juveniles in the population.
Well, see, I took that just the opposite when you said, there's a chance. So you're telling me there's a chance.
There's a chance. All right.
So,
that's right.
yeah.
Well, that's right. It could be, it would be very difficult to do a lot worse than last year, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
That's one way.
Well, hey, Tony, we'd like to have you on as a regular guest as the season progresses, and we just really appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Hey, that sounds good. I was good talking with you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the DU Podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show, and visit www.ducks.org/DU Podcast for resources based on today's topics, as well as access to more episodes. Opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect those of Ducks Unlimited. Until next time, stay tuned to the Ducks.